There is belief, and then there is skepticism. Between the two lies a vast territory of questions and the unknown. What if reality is far more complex than we have been willing to perceive? What if the stories we dismissed as myth and legend hold the keys to understanding consciousness? From ghostly encounters to inexplicable lights in the sky, humanity has always sensed there was something more out there. Some call it paranormal, and others call it the divine. Some look to the stars for answers, while others search within. Philosophy asks, why? Theology asks, who? Science asks, how? And we ask ourselves, what if? We stand at the meeting point, a place where the veil between realities is thinner than you might think. This is the crossroads of the veil. We spoke previously about connections with Dr. Jacques Vallée and his passport to Magonia, and now we turn our focus to the next name in that list. We're venturing into the world of a man who dared to look the impossible in his multifaceted, often terrifying eyes, John Alva Keel. And at the heart of our journey lies his seminal, deeply unsettling work, Operation Trojan Horse. Forget your neat, tidy explanations of lights in the sky. Discard your comforting notions of benevolent star voyagers from distant galaxies. Keel's research, a relentless 4-year, 7-day-a-week plunge into the maelstrom of the unexplained, paints a picture far more ancient, far more insidious, and infinitely more bizarre. It's a world where the phenomena aren't just observing us. They're interacting, manipulating, and perhaps leading us down a path not of our own choosing. A path paved with cunning deceptions and psychological warfare. Keel warned us that our skies have been filled with Trojan horses throughout history, and like the original Trojan horse, they seem to conceal hostile intent. So, dim the lights, settle in, and prepare to question everything you thought you knew. The veil is thin, and the echoes from the other side, the whispers of the ultraterrestrials, are growing louder. Imagine, if you will, a tapestry woven not with threads of silk and gold, but with whispers of the impossible, threads of fear, and the chilling touch of the unknown. This is the tapestry John Keel spent a lifetime unraveling, a complex pattern of baffling aerial objects, enigmatic entities, and a pervasive sense of cosmic trickery. He didn't just collect stories of flying saucers, those fleeting lights that danced mockingly in our skies. He plunged into a veritable ocean of anomalies, phantom airships haunting the skies of a bygone era, their spectral forms heralding a new age of mechanical wonders, yet behaving with an intelligence that defied their supposed origins. He chased creatures of nightmare stalking remote countrysides, beings like the Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a winged harbinger of doom whose appearance coincided with a chilling wave of paranormal activity and tragic prophecy. He documented the unnerving visits of men in black suits, delivering cryptic warnings or issuing sinister threats, where their very presence an omen of deeper, darker currents at play. And through it all, a cacophony of psychic disturbances seemed to follow in their wake, a ripple effect of high strangeness that touched the lives of ordinary people in profoundly unsettling ways. What if these weren't isolated incidents, random glitches in the matrix of reality, mere damned facts, as Charles Fort, Keel's intellectual predecessor, might have called them? What if, as Keel came to suspect with growing dread, they were all notes in a single, discordant symphony, orchestrated by an intelligence so alien, so ancient, that its motives remain terrifyingly opaque? An intelligence, perhaps, not from the stars, but from a realm much closer, a realm that interpenetrates our own, existing just beyond the threshold of our five senses, in what Keel would later term the superspectrum. Operation Trojan Horse, published in 1970, wasn't just a book. It was Keel's declaration of war against simplistic explanations, his magnum opus that tore through the comforting veil of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It was his assertion that the visitors might not be visitors at all. They might be something far closer to home, yet infinitely more alien, a force that wears our expectations like a mask, a paraphysical phenomenon that has been playing a long, dark, and deceptive game with humanity since time immemorial. This isn't just a single event, a solitary light in the sky. It's the dawning, horrifying realization that the reality we inhabit might be a meticulously crafted stage, a grand illusion, and we are merely actors unaware of the true director, or perhaps the true nature of the play itself. The air crackles with this tension, a sense of foreboding that whispers, "You are not alone, and you are being watched by something that understands you, your beliefs, your fears, far better than you understand yourselves." Something that, as Keel put it, has made us believe, first, in angels and phantom armies, later in mystery inventors, ghost airplanes and ghost rockets, and finally in the splendid Venusians. The game is afoot, and the stakes are nothing less than our perception of reality. Every descent into the rabbit hole, every journey to the dark heart of a mystery, begins with a single step, a seemingly innocuous event that pries open a door to the unexpected, a door that, once opened, can never truly be closed. For John Alva Keel, born March 25, 1930 in Hornell, New York, and later known to the world as John A. Keel, that pivotal moment arrived not in a darkened laboratory amidst bubbling concoctions, nor during a lonely vigil under star-strewn skies, but through the relatively mundane channels of his early, yet already vibrant, career. Keel was a precocious talent, a mind alight with curiosity from a young age. Raised by his grandparents after his parents' divorce, his fascination with magic earned him the moniker Houdini among his peers. But it was the written word that truly captivated him. He published his first story in a magician's magazine at the tender age of 12, a clear indication of his burgeoning literary prowess and his early interest in the art of illusion and the unexplained. So determined was he to become a writer that he quit school at 16, a bold move that underscored his unwavering commitment to his chosen path. At 17, he found himself in Greenwich Village, New York City, immersing himself in the bohemian life of a freelance writer. His talents were diverse. He contributed to newspapers, scripted for the burgeoning mediums of radio and television, and even edited a poetry magazine. His early life was a whirlwind of creative endeavor. Then came a stint in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. Stationed with the American Forces Network in Frankfurt, Germany, he rose to become Chief of Productions. Crucially, Keel claimed this period included training in psychological warfare as a propaganda writer. He was learning the art of shaping perception, of crafting narratives to influence belief, skills that would later provide him with a unique, if unsettling, lens through which to view the phenomena he would investigate. Little did he know how intimately familiar he would become with those very arts, but from the other, far stranger, side of the equation. After his military service, Keel's adventurous spirit led him to work as a foreign radio correspondent. He traveled extensively through the Middle East and Asia, experiences that found their way into his first book, Jadoo, published in 1957. In its pages, he chronicled his investigations into legendary phenomena like the Indian rope trick and the elusive Yeti. He was already dipping his toes into the murky waters of the strange, already questioning the boundaries of the known. His writing wasn't confined to nonfiction. He even penned novels under pseudonyms, further honing his storytelling craft. A significant intellectual influence during this formative period was Charles Fort, that iconoclastic chronicler of the damned, those anomalous facts and events ignored or dismissed by mainstream science. Fort's compilations of the unexplained, his skepticism towards dogmatic explanations, and his embrace of the weird resonated deeply with Keel's own developing worldview. Many would come to see Keel as Fort's literary successor, a kindred spirit in the relentless pursuit of patterns within the anomalous. But the true inciting incident, the spark that would ignite a lifelong inferno of paranormal investigation, came in 1966. Playboy magazine commissioned Keel to write an article about unidentified flying objects. The piece was ultimately rejected, a seemingly minor event, a footnote in a burgeoning career. But for Keel, it was a catalyst. The research it entailed, the initial interviews he conducted, the sheer, overwhelming volume of reports he began to uncover, it was like pulling a loose thread that began to unravel a much larger, more complex, and infinitely more disturbing tapestry. Initially, like many of his contemporaries, figures such as the respected astronomer Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who famously transitioned from Air Force unidentified flying object skeptic to cautious believer, and the equally brilliant, multifaceted researcher Jacques Vallée, who also explored the folkloric and manipulative aspects of the phenomenon, Keel approached the unidentified flying objects enigma with a degree of optimism, perhaps even a hope of validating the extraterrestrial hypothesis. The extraterrestrial hypothesis, the then dominant idea that these objects were spacecraft piloted by visitors from other worlds, advanced civilizations reaching across the cosmic gulf. It was, and remains, a tantalizing, almost romantic notion. But Keel was not one to be easily satisfied with prevailing narratives or second-hand accounts. His journalistic instincts, sharpened by years in the field, demanded rigor, demanded first-hand investigation. As he stated in the foreword to Operation Trojan Horse, "For the past 4 years, I have worked full-time, 7 days a week, without a vacation, to investigate and research unidentified flying objects events in total depth, hacking my way systematically through all of the myths and beliefs which surround this fascinating subject." He embarked on an exhaustive journey, crisscrossing the United States, eventually traveling through 20 states, interviewing thousands of witnesses, delving into the minutiae of their encounters. He didn't just collect reports. He lived them, breathed them, let the sheer, unadulterated weirdness of it all seep into his very being. He noted, "I seldom let the witnesses know that other people in other sections of the country had told me identical stories. By maintaining this secrecy, I was able to make unique correlations that might not otherwise have been possible." And as he did, as he listened to countless tales of impossible aerial maneuvers, of landings in remote fields, of encounters with beings that defied easy description, the neat framework of the extraterrestrial hypothesis began to buckle. It buckled under the weight of inconsistencies, of blatant absurdities, of a disquieting sense of performance, of a carefully orchestrated stage show. The inciting incident wasn't just a magazine assignment. It was an invitation into a labyrinth, a maze of mystery, where every turn revealed new and more baffling questions. And John Keel, with his insatiable curiosity, his journalistic tenacity, and his burgeoning understanding of psychological manipulation, stepped willingly, if perhaps trepidatiously, inside. The air of mystery was no longer a distant curiosity. It was becoming his constant, unsettling companion, the very atmosphere he breathed. There comes a point in every investigator's journey, especially one charting such treacherous and unmapped territories as John Keel, where the accumulated evidence, the sheer weight of anomalous data, forces a radical re-evaluation, a departure from the comfortable shores of accepted theory into the turbulent waters of the unknown. For Keel, this critical threshold, this point of no return, was crossed definitively in 1967. After a year of intensive, relentless fieldwork, of sifting through countless eyewitness testimonies, of trying to fit the bizarre, often contradictory puzzle pieces of the unidentified flying objects phenomenon into the existing framework of extraterrestrial visitation, he found the extraterrestrial hypothesis not just lacking, but fundamentally flawed. It wasn't merely that the extraterrestrial hypothesis didn't fit all the facts. It felt increasingly like an ill-fitting mask, a convenient, almost simplistic explanation that obscured a far more complex, ancient, and profoundly unsettling truth. I abandoned the extraterrestrial hypothesis in 1967, Keel would later write, his words carrying the immense weight of those thousands of interviews, those endless miles traveled, those sleepless nights spent pondering the impossible. He continued, when my own field investigations disclosed an astonishing overlap between psychic phenomena and unidentified flying objects, the objects and apparitions do not necessarily originate on another planet and may not even exist as permanent constructions of matter. It is more likely that we see what we want to see and interpret such visions according to our contemporary beliefs. This was a seismic shift in perspective, a foundational crack in the edifice of conventional ufology. It wasn't just about questioning the origin of the craft. Were they from Mars, Venus, or some distant star system? It was about questioning the very nature of the experience itself, the reliability of human perception, and the possibility that the phenomenon was interacting with us on a level far deeper and more subtle than mere physical observation. Keel was no longer looking for nuts and bolts spacecraft from distant stars, piloted by curious explorers or benevolent scientists. He was peering into a far deeper, murkier well, one that seemed to reflect not just lights in the sky, but the deepest strata of human folklore, mythology, religious visions, and even the hidden, often treacherous landscapes of the human psyche. This was the true threshold, the moment Keel stepped away from the relatively comfortable, if speculative, idea of alien visitors and into a realm populated by what he would come to term ultraterrestrials. This was a concept he borrowed, in part, from the occultist Meade Lane, who spoke of benign Etherians. However, Keel's ultraterrestrials would take on a far more ambiguous and often manipulative character. These weren't beings from other planets, he began to theorize, but entities coexisting with humanity, perhaps native to Earth but existing in a different dimensional framework, a different vibrational state, or as part of an Earth-based intelligence that had remained hidden, interacting with us in ways we were only beginning, and perhaps were not meant to comprehend. They were, in his view, paraphysical, shape-shifting intelligences capable of manipulating matter and energy, and, most disturbingly, human perception. The implications were staggering and, frankly, terrifying. If these phenomena weren't from out there, but from right here, or from a reality that interpenetrates our own, then the rules of engagement changed entirely. The phenomenon was not a recent arrival, not a consequence of our atomic age or our first forays into space. Instead, it was an ancient companion, a constant presence throughout human history, its manifestations adapting to the cultural and technological zeitgeist of each era. The angels and demons of antiquity, the fairies and elementals of folklore, the phantom airships of the 19th century. They could all be different masks worn by this same elusive intelligence. The sense of foreboding deepened. This wasn't about distant explorers observing us from afar. This was about something intimately, perhaps inextricably, linked to the human experience, something that had been with us all along, lurking just beyond the veil of perception, manipulating our beliefs, shaping our myths, and perhaps even guiding the course of our history. The stars, as a primary source of these mysteries, began to shatter in Keel's understanding. In their place, shadows began to lengthen, shadows that hinted at a truth far stranger, and potentially far more dangerous than anyone had dared to imagine. Keel had crossed the threshold, committing himself to a path less traveled, a path shrouded in an ever-thickening atmosphere of the unknown, where the very fabric of reality seemed to fray at the edges. He was now on a quest not just to identify flying objects, but to understand the nature of illusion itself, and the intelligences that seemed so adept at weaving it. As John Keel ventured deeper into this new, unsettling territory, abandoning the relatively straightforward extraterrestrial hypothesis for the far more complex and disturbing concept of ultraterrestrials, the landscape of the paranormal began to reveal its truly bewildering and often menacing contours. The initial complication wasn't a frustrating lack of evidence, but rather an overwhelming, almost suffocating, deluge of it. A cascade of sightings, encounters, and experiences so varied, so bizarre, and so often nonsensical that they defied any easy categorization or rational explanation. This was the first moment the sheer, unadulterated strangeness of the phenomenon threatened to overwhelm any attempt at systematic analysis, pushing the boundaries to their breaking point and hinting at a deliberate, almost mocking obfuscation. Witnesses from all walks of life reported craft of every conceivable shape and size. The classic flying saucers were there, of course, but so were cigars, triangles, squares, amorphous blobs of light, and objects that seemed to shift and change form, as if made of quicksilver or condensed light. These objects performed impossible aerial maneuvers, accelerating to incredible speeds in an instant, executing right-angle turns that would crush any known pilot, appearing and disappearing as if winking in and out of existence, all in blatant defiance of the laws of physics as we understand them. Keel meticulously documented these patterns, noting in Operation Trojan Horse that the objects have always chosen to operate in a clandestine manner, furtively choosing the hours of darkness for their enigmatic activities over thinly populated areas. He even found statistical anomalies, like the Wednesday phenomenon, where sightings inexplicably clustered on Wednesday evenings, and a tendency for activity to concentrate within specific geographical window areas, often linked to magnetic anomalies or geological faults. But it was the interactions, the close encounters with the alleged occupants of these craft, that truly pushed the boundaries of belief into the realm of the utterly surreal. Aliens would emerge, sometimes looking remarkably human, albeit with unsettlingly perfect features. Other times, they were described as grotesque caricatures from a fever dream, diminutive humanoids with oversized heads and large dark eyes, towering hairy ape men, or even bizarre robotic-looking entities. They would deliver messages, sometimes of profound cosmic wisdom or dire warnings about atomic warfare, but just as often, these messages were utterly contradictory or nonsensical. They'd perform absurd tasks, meticulously collecting soil samples from a suburban lawn in full view of bewildered onlookers, painstakingly examining a farmer's tractor with an air of intense scientific scrutiny, or even, in one infamous Keel-documented case, gifting a startled contactee with a stack of freshly made pancakes, as happened to Joe Simonton in Eagle River, Wisconsin, in 1961. Simonton described his visitors as about 5 feet tall, dark-skinned, wore clinging dark blue uniforms with turtleneck tops, and had on apparently knitted headgear. The pancakes, when analyzed, proved to be made of ordinary cornmeal, salt, and hydrogenated oil. This carnival of absurdity, as some might call it, was a profound complication for Keel. If these were indeed advanced extraterrestrial intelligences, why the often reported faulty workmanship in their vessels? Why the frequent breakdowns, or the objects that seemed to lose pieces of metal, or even explode in mid-air? Why the often pointless, ludicrous, or even childish interactions with human beings? Keel began to suspect that this pervasive absurdity was not accidental, not a sign of incompetence, but deliberate, a form of psychological stagecraft, an elaborate put-on designed to confuse observers, to discredit witnesses, to obfuscate the true nature of the phenomenon, and to lead investigators down countless blind alleys. It was, perhaps, a key element of the cosmic hoax. And then came the Men in Black. Keel was one of the first researchers to systematically document and popularize the Men in Black phenomenon, coining the very acronym that would seep into popular culture and become synonymous with paranormal intimidation and government conspiracy. But Keel's Men in Black weren't necessarily the government agents often portrayed in fiction. They were something other, something far more unsettling. They were often described by witnesses as having an unnerving, not quite human appearance, unnaturally pale or unusually dark, almost olive-toned skin, odd, sharp facial features, sometimes with a vaguely oriental cast, and eyes that were often described as strangely vacant or piercing. They typically wore ill-fitting or slightly outdated dark suits, pristine as if brand new, even their shoes appearing unwalked on. They would appear, often unannounced and sometimes in groups of 3, at the homes of unidentified flying objects witnesses, sometimes with uncanny speed, arriving mere hours after a sighting that hadn't yet been reported to anyone. These Men in Black would ask strange, probing questions, occasionally displaying an unnerving, almost telepathic knowledge of the witness's personal life, details they couldn't possibly have known through conventional means. They would often issue veiled or overt threats, warning witnesses to remain silent about their experiences, sometimes confiscating photographs or alleged evidence. Their vehicles, too, were often reported as large, black, and sometimes strangely vintage or impossibly pristine, often new Cadillacs with untraceable license plates. Keel himself reported encounters with these enigmatic figures, describing them as short, dark-skinned Orientals. These Men in Black encounters added a palpable layer of fear, paranoia, and direct intimidation to the already baffling unidentified flying objects mystery. Were they government agents trying to suppress the truth about alien visitation? Or were they, as Keel increasingly suspected, part of the phenomenon itself? Another layer of the elaborate deception. Another cast of characters in the ultraterrestrial's grand, bewildering play. The Men in Black complicated everything, blurring the lines between the observed and the observer, between the phenomenon and those who sought to understand it. They were a significant tightening of the screws on investigators like Keel, a constant, unnerving reminder that they were dealing with an intelligence that was not only elusive and deceptive, but potentially hostile, capable of reaching out and touching their lives, and the lives of their witnesses, in deeply unsettling and psychologically damaging ways. The air of mystery was now irrevocably tinged with a distinct sense of menace, a foreboding that whispered of unseen watchers, unknown agendas, and a game where the rules were constantly changing, and the players were far from human. The unknown wasn't just out there in the skies, it was knocking on the door, Every investigation, every descent into the spiraling depths of a profound mystery, as a moment of crucial revelation, a turning point where the different, confusing threads begin to coalesce, weaving themselves into a recognizable, if often terrifying, pattern. For John Keel, this unveiling of a new and deeply unsettling reality culminated in the publication of his landmark 1970 book, Operation Trojan Horse. This wasn't just another collection of unidentified flying object sightings, another catalog of unexplained aerial phenomena. It was the full, unadulterated articulation of his radical and deeply challenging thesis. The core of Operation Trojan Horse was a direct, meticulously argued, and ultimately devastating assault on the prevailing extraterrestrial hypothesis. Keel, armed with a wealth of painstakingly gathered evidence, historical records, first-hand witness testimonies from his extensive fieldwork, and detailed pattern analysis of sighting reports, argued that unidentified flying objects were not spacecraft from other planets. Instead, he proposed they were ultraterrestrial manifestations. These were, in his view, paraphysical phenomena, temporary materializations, or transmogrifications of energy, originating from an intelligent, non-human, or perhaps transhuman, source that coexists with Earth. This intelligence, he theorized, operates from a different dimensional framework or energy state, a realm he would later explore in more detail as the superspectrum, a vast continuum of electromagnetic energy existing beyond our normal sensory range. These shape-shifting objects and entities only become visible, Keel suggested, when they descend into the narrow band of light perceptible to human senses. The very title, Operation Trojan Horse, encapsulated his central, chilling idea. These manifestations, in all their varied, often contradictory, and frequently absurd forms, were part of a grand deception. Like the mythical wooden horse gifted to the unsuspecting Trojans, they appeared as one thing: alien spacecraft, divine messengers, folkloric creatures, even advanced secret terrestrial technology, while concealing a different, often manipulative and potentially hostile intent. Keel posited that this intelligence has been interacting with humanity for millennia, adapting its disguises, its Trojan horses, to suit the cultural, religious, and technological zeitgeist of each era. What appeared as angels or demons in antiquity, as fairies, elves, or elementals in the medieval period, as phantom airships cruising the skies of the late 19th century, had now, in the atomic and space age, donned the convincing mask of the extraterrestrial visitor. Keel meticulously drew parallels between modern unidentified flying objects reports, the strange lights, the landed craft, the encounters with humanoid beings, and the rich, often terrifying, tapestry of global folklore, mythology, and religious accounts. The little people of Celtic lore, the jinn of Middle Eastern tales, the sky gods and nature spirits of indigenous cultures, the very angels and demons described in sacred texts, all, Keel suggested, were different facets of the same adaptable, paraphysical phenomenon. He pointed to the inherent absurdity in many encounters, the faulty workmanship often reported in the construction of alleged craft, the nonsensical messages delivered by supposed aliens, not as evidence against their reality, but as hallmarks of their deceptive nature. These were not errors or signs of incompetence, Keel argued, but deliberate tactics of psychological warfare, elements of a cosmic hoax designed to confuse, to mislead, to implant beliefs, and, ultimately, to prevent humanity from grasping the true nature and intent of the intelligence behind the charade. He presented compelling historical case studies to bolster this argument. The mystery airship wave of 1896 to 1897 in the United States, with its reports of Victorian-looking contraptions and human-like occupants making bizarre claims, was a prime example. The 1883 photographs by Mexican astronomer José Bonilla, capturing hundreds of objects crossing the solar disk, provided what seemed like early photographic evidence of unidentified flying objects, underscoring the long history of such phenomena. And then there were the truly bizarre folkloric accounts, like the sky anchor story from around 1200 AD, where an anchor allegedly fell from a ship in the sky, snagging on a church, followed by a crewman descending a rope, only to suffocate in Earth's atmosphere. For Keel, such tales, whether literal or legendary, exemplified the ultraterrestrial modus operandi, staging inexplicable, absurd performances that defy conventional understanding and leave behind tantalizing, yet ultimately ambiguous traces. It was, Keel argued, an ongoing psychological operation of immense proportions, designed to shape human perception and, perhaps, human destiny. The publication of Operation Trojan Horse was Keel, planting his flag firmly in this new, disturbing territory. He was no longer just an unidentified flying objects investigator. He was a chronicler of a vast interdimensional masquerade, a detective exposing a cosmic con game. The pervasive sense of foreboding that permeated his work now took on a chilling clarity. The unknown wasn't just unknown. It was actively, intelligently, trying to remain so, hiding its true face behind a bewildering procession of ever-changing masks. The implications were profound and deeply unsettling. If Keel was right, then much of what humanity considered to be supernatural, divine, or alien was part of this singular, ancient, and manipulative force. The study of unidentified flying objects, therefore, was not just about lights in the sky. It was about the very nature of reality, belief, and deception. No revolutionary theory, especially one as paradigm-shattering and deeply unsettling as John Keel's ultraterrestrial hypothesis and his concept of a cosmic hoax, goes unchallenged or unscrutinized. As Operation Trojan Horse and his subsequent equally provocative works like The Mothman Prophecies and The Eighth Tower sent ripples or perhaps shock waves through the communities of ufology, paranormal research, and even into the fringes of academic and philosophical discourse, a second, more insidious point began to emerge. This wasn't solely about the external strangeness of the phenomena Keel documented, the bizarre encounters, or the manipulative entities. It was also about the internal pressures of the investigation itself, the pointed critiques from skeptics and even some peers, the immense psychological toll such relentless immersion in high strangeness undoubtedly took on Keel, and the deeply unsettling, almost existentially terrifying, implications if his theories held even a kernel of truth. One of the most significant and frequently cited criticisms of Keel's methodology and accuracy came from journalist John C. Sherwood. David Clarke, a British academic and folklorist who has written extensively on Keel, also noted Keel's stylistic approach. Clarke observed Keel's use of new journalism techniques, a literary style made popular in the 1960s and 1970s that often blended factual reporting with subjective experience, personal reflection, and literary flair. This approach, while making for engaging and atmospheric reading, could potentially blur the lines between objective truth and compelling storytelling, between dispassionate investigation and the creation of a modern mythos. Keel himself, in his foreword to Operation Trojan Horse, acknowledged the sheer volume of data he processed. The original manuscript was more than 2,000 pages long. It has been boiled down and carefully edited to its present length. In the process, a good deal of documentation and many details have been deleted or heavily condensed. While necessary for publication, such editing can inevitably lead to questions about selection bias and emphasis. These criticisms, particularly Sherwood's, served as a kind of reversal, a moment where the investigator himself came under the microscope, adding another layer of complexity and ambiguity to the already tangled web Keel was attempting to unravel. Beyond external critiques, there was the undeniable personal toll that such an all-consuming investigation into the bizarre and the manipulative must have exacted. Keel's immersion in the world of high strangeness was not without consequence. He reported experiencing his own share of paranormal harassment, strange, untraceable phone calls filled with bizarre voices or cryptic messages, periods of apparent surveillance by unknown individuals, and unsettling, synchro-mystic encounters that mirrored those of the very witnesses he interviewed. In Operation Trojan Horse, he recounts, "My telephone ran amok first, with mysterious strangers calling day and night to deliver bizarre messages from the space people. Then I was catapulted into the dreamlike fantasy world of demonology. I kept rendezvous with black Cadillacs on Long Island, and when I tried to pursue them, they would disappear impossibly on dead-end roads. More than once I woke up in the middle of the night to find myself unable to move, with a huge dark apparition standing over me." Some accounts and reviews suggest that the relentless pursuit of these elusive truths, the constant exposure to the bizarre, the psychologically taxing interactions with often traumatized witnesses, and the phenomenon's apparent ability to directly interact with and manipulate investigators pushed Keel to his own psychological limits. The veracity of such a dramatic claim speaks to the immense pressure and potential psychological impact of confronting a phenomenon that seems designed to destabilize one's sense of reality, to erode the boundaries between the subjective and objective. Keel himself admitted, "For a time I questioned my own sanity. I kept profuse notes, a daily journal which now reads like something from the pen of Edgar Allan Poe or H.P. Lovecraft. And then there were the chilling implications of his theories. If Keel's ultraterrestrials were real, if humanity was indeed subject to a vast, ancient, and profoundly manipulative intelligence that operated from a superspectrum beyond our normal perception, what did that mean for human free will, for the validity of our history, for the very nature of human consciousness and belief? The idea that our most cherished beliefs, our religions, our myths, our scientific aspirations, even our political movements, could be subtly guided or overtly manipulated by these paraphysical entities was a profoundly disturbing thought. It painted a picture of humanity not as masters of its own destiny, but as unwitting, often helpless, players in a cosmic game with rules we didn't understand, and stakes that were terrifyingly, existentially high. This was the ultimate chilling possibility that the fear of the unknown was not just a fear of what was out there, but a fear of what was inside us, what was shaping us, perhaps what was us, without our full knowledge or consent. The foreboding atmosphere that permeated Keel's work became a suffocating blanket, heavy with the weight of these unresolved questions, the whispers of doubt, and the potential for a truth more sinister and mind-bending than any fiction. As John Keel delved ever deeper into the heart of the paranormal labyrinth, his theories evolved, growing more intricate, more encompassing, and in many ways, more profoundly alarming. The unfolding narrative isn't a single dramatic event, but rather the dawning, chilling comprehension of the sheer scale, the almost unimaginable power, and the utterly incomprehensible nature of the forces he believed were at play. This was where his concepts of the superspectrum and the enigmatic Eighth Tower came to the forefront, painting a picture of reality that was not only manipulated and deceptive, but fundamentally alien to our everyday understanding, a reality governed by intelligences whose motives and mechanisms might forever remain beyond our grasp. To explain the operational domain of his ultraterrestrials, the very medium through which they manifested and interacted with our world, Keel introduced and elaborated upon the idea of the superspectrum. This wasn't just another dimension in the abstract speculative sense often found in science fiction. For Keel, the superspectrum was a vast energetic continuum, an extension of the known electromagnetic spectrum, existing at frequencies far beyond the narrow band perceptible to human senses and our current scientific instrumentation. Unidentified flying objects, ghostly apparitions, cryptid creatures, poltergeist phenomena, even religious visions and demonic encounters, Keel theorized, were composed of energies from these upper, or perhaps lower, uncharted reaches of this spectrum. They only became visible, tangible, or interactive with our physical reality when they descended or shifted their vibrational rate, their energy state, into our limited perceptual window. As he explained in Operation Trojan Horse, the phenomenon is mostly invisible to us because it consists of energy rather than solid earthly matter. It can make itself visible to us from time to time by manipulating patterns of frequency. It can take any form it desires, ranging from the shapes of airplanes to gigantic cylindrical spaceships. It can manifest itself into seemingly living entities ranging from little green men to awesome one-eyed giants. But none of these configurations is its true form. This other place, as he sometimes called it, was a parallel energetic plane interpenetrating our own, operating under different, or perhaps more encompassing, physical laws. This allowed for the seemingly impossible feats attributed to these phenomena. Sudden materialization and dematerialization as if from thin air, defiance of gravity and inertia, the ability to morph and change shape with bewildering speed, and the capacity to pass through solid objects. The superspectrum was the invisible ocean in which these paraphysical intelligences swam, the hidden environment from which they emerged and into which they retreated, occasionally breaching the surface of our consensus reality to interact with our world in ways that were both baffling and often terrifying. This concept also offered an explanation for the electromagnetic effects often reported in conjunction with unidentified flying object sightings, stalled car engines, power outages, radio interference, as these could be byproducts of the immense energies being manipulated. If the superspectrum described the how of these manifestations, then The Eighth Tower, Keel's 1975 book, a later and perhaps more overtly metaphysical and speculative work, hinted at the who or what might be the ultimate source or controller behind it all, drawing on an esoteric Eastern legend that spoke of 7 hidden towers on Earth, occupied by malevolent forces constantly chanting the world to ruin. Keel proposed the existence of an 8th, even more potent and enigmatic tower, not necessarily a physical structure, but a source of immense, almost infinite cosmic power, an intelligence or superconsciousness that was neither good nor evil in human terms, but operated with its own inscrutable cosmic purpose, far beyond our moral or ethical frameworks. This 8th tower represented, in Keel's increasingly grim cosmology, a controlling cosmic force, a superintelligence, perhaps even the ultimate architect of the game being played with humanity. Unidentified flying objects, ultraterrestrials, psychic phenomena, religious miracles, demonic encounters, men in black. Even the very synchronicities and meaningful coincidences that seem to plague investigators, all could be mere tools, puppets on the strings of this overarching, indifferent, and unimaginably powerful entity. Humanity itself, in this paradigm, was not a species charting its own destiny, but, as Keel starkly put it, biochemical robots, helplessly controlled by forces that can scramble our brains, destroy our memories, and use us in any way they see fit. We were, perhaps, pawns in a celestial game. This was the ultimate crisis point in Keel's worldview, And for anyone who dared to follow his logic to its unsettling conclusions, the realization that humanity might not just be dealing with mischievous tricksters or manipulative interdimensional entities, but could be subject to a cosmic control system of such vastness, subtlety, and complexity that it dwarfed all human understanding and aspiration. The sense of foreboding that had always permeated Keel's work reached its terrifying zenith here. It wasn't just about deception. It was about a fundamental lack of agency, a universe where human history, consciousness, and even our perception of free will were potentially just ripples in a much larger, unseen and uncaring cosmic ocean, orchestrated by the intelligence or intelligences residing in or emanating from this symbolic eighth tower. The fear of the unknown became the fear of the unknowable, of a reality so profoundly alien, so fundamentally different from our assumptions, that it threatened to dissolve the very foundations of human identity, purpose, and meaning. This was the potential disaster, the chilling, paralyzing thought that we are not, and perhaps never have been, truly in control of our own minds, our own world, our own destiny. The game was far bigger and far stranger than anyone had imagined. After years spent navigating the treacherous, often disorienting, currents of the paranormal, after confronting the absurd, the terrifying, and the utterly inexplicable, John Keel arrived at a climactic understanding, a profound moment of truth that sought to unify the seemingly chaotic fragments of his vast research. This wasn't a neat resolution. Instead, it was a breathtaking, and for many, a deeply unsettling vision of an interconnected reality. This was Keel's attempt to make sense of it all, to find the underlying pattern in the cosmic madness. Keel's moment of truth, the central argument that emerged from the crucible of his investigations, was the profound realization that the myriad phenomena he had so meticulously documented, the unidentified flying objects in their countless forms, the enigmatic men in black, the cryptid creatures like Mothman and Bigfoot that haunted the shadowy corners of our world, the ghosts and poltergeists that plagued unsuspecting households, the bewildering array of psychic events, from telepathy to precognition, even the religious miracles and demonic encounters that have shaped human belief for millennia, were not isolated, disparate occurrences. They were, he argued with unwavering conviction, different masks worn by the same underlying intelligence, different manifestations of the same adaptable paraphysical force. The ultraterrestrials, those elusive denizens of the superspectrum, were the common denominator, the puppeteers pulling the strings of a vast global and historical stage show, a cosmic commedia dell'arte where the costumes changed, but the actors, or at least the intelligence behind them, remained constant. This was a radical, even heretical, departure from the specialized, often rigidly siloed, approach prevalent in paranormal research. Ufologists studied unidentified flying objects, cryptozoologists chased monsters, psychical researchers investigated ghosts and ESP, and theologians debated miracles and demons, each often operating within their own distinct conceptual bubbles, rarely looking for connections across these arbitrary boundaries. Keel, in his relentless Fortean pursuit of patterns, his journalistic drive to connect the dots, he saw the phantom airships of the 1890s not as failed human experiments or early alien probes from another planet, but as the same phenomenon that would later manifest as flying saucers in the post-World War II era, simply adapting its disguise to the evolving technological consciousness and expectations of the time. The glowing red eyes of the Mothman, the terrifying harbinger of Point Pleasant, were, in his interconnected view, linked to the strange, silent lights maneuvering in the night sky above, and both were inextricably tied to the unsettling visits from men in black and the widespread psychic disturbances, precognitive dreams, telepathic messages, poltergeist activity that plagued witnesses in window areas. This grand synthesis was the intellectual and investigative climax of Keel's journey. It suggested that the source of these mysteries was far more complex, versatile, ancient, and intimately involved with humanity than commonly acknowledged. It wasn't simply about aliens from Planet X, or spirits of the dead in the traditional spiritualist sense, or even isolated government experiments. It was about an ever-present, intelligent, and often profoundly deceptive energy or consciousness that permeates our reality, interacting with human consciousness in ways that are both deeply personal and globally consistent across cultures and centuries. This intelligence, Keel proposed, was a master of psychological warfare, employing what he termed the artifact game, leaving behind tantalizing but ultimately misleading physical non-evidence, like slag, metal fragments of ordinary earthly composition, tin, magnesium, aluminum, or even Joe Simonton's infamous pancakes. These were not proofs of extraterrestrial technology, but props in the ongoing deception, designed to reinforce belief in whatever frame of reference the phenomenon was currently promoting. The ultimate truth, as Keel perceived it, through the dense fog of illusion, was that reality itself was not the stable, objective, independently existing construct we generally believe it to be. It was, or could be, fluid, malleable, and profoundly influenced by these ultra-terrestrial forces, and, crucially, by our own perceptions, beliefs, and expectations. "We see what we want to see," he often stated, or perhaps, more chillingly, "we see what they want us to see." The phenomenon, he came to believe, actively cultivates belief in various frames of references, and then deliberately creates new manifestations which support those beliefs. This implied a dynamic, interactive universe, a feedback loop where belief wasn't just a passive response to an external reality, but an active ingredient in its very construction, a powerful force that the ultraterrestrials were masters at exploiting and manipulating for their own inscrutable purposes. This climactic vision was Keel's ultimate challenge to consensus reality. It was a declaration that the paranormal wasn't just a collection of spooky stories for campfire entertainment, or a fringe subject for eccentrics, but a fundamental, if deeply hidden, aspect of our existence. It was evidence of a constant, often unsettling dialogue with an other that defies easy definition but relentlessly demands our attention, often through fear, confusion, and ontological shock. The fear of the unknown, in Keel's final sobering analysis, was the fear of recognizing the true, bizarre, interactive, and perhaps terrifyingly illusory nature of the universe we inhabit, and our own precarious place within it. The players were many, their motives obscure, but the game, Keel insisted, was very, very real. And so we stand gazing into the vast and unsettling landscape meticulously charted by John A. Keel. The echoes of his relentless research, the chilling implications of his theories, still reverberate through the shadowy corridors of paranormal thought, decades after his most influential works first challenged our understanding of reality. His journey, from a curious journalist to the preeminent theorist of the ultraterrestrial and the cosmic hoax, culminating in the challenging theses of Operation Trojan Horse and his broader, deeply interconnected body of work, didn't provide us with easy answers. No comforting resolutions to the enigma of the unknown. Instead, John Keel bequeathed to us a legacy of profound, unsettling questions, a lingering sense of cosmic unease, and an enduring, necessary challenge to our most fundamental assumptions about the world around us, the nature of consciousness, and the elusive forces that may subtly or overtly shape our existence. Keel passed away on July 3, 2009, at the age of 79, but his influence is undeniable, his shadow long. He, alongside a very few other pioneering figures like Jacques Vallée, irrevocably broadened the scope of ufology and paranormal investigation. He pushed these fields beyond the relatively simplistic confines of nuts-and-bolts spacecraft from other planets into the far stranger, more intellectually demanding territories of paraphysics, interdimensionality, psychic phenomena, and sophisticated psychological manipulation. His unwavering insistence on the interconnectedness of all paranormal phenomena, from unidentified flying objects and cryptids to ghosts and religious miracles, continues to inspire and perhaps demand a more holistic, if infinitely more daunting, approach to investigating the multifaceted mysteries that confront us. Concepts he popularized, like the Men in Black, have transcended niche research and become iconic figures in our cultural lexicon, potent symbols of hidden knowledge, shadowy influence, and the unnerving sense that we are not always being told the full story. But perhaps Keel's most potent and enduring legacy is the Trojan Horse itself, not just as a specific theory to explain unidentified flying objects, but as a powerful, overarching metaphor for a reality that might be far more illusory, more constructed, more subtly manipulated than we dare to imagine. Are we truly perceiving an objective, independently existing universe? Or are our senses, our beliefs, our cherished myths, our religions, even our scientific paradigms being subtly orchestrated, or perhaps overtly stage-managed, by an ancient paraphysical intelligence? An intelligence that operates from the hidden depths of the superspectrum, from the symbolic shadow of an eighth tower, for purposes that remain stubbornly, terrifyingly, beyond our current human fathoming? The critiques of his methodology, the questions raised about the literalness of his ultraterrestrials, a term which Keel himself later acknowledged could be seen as a literary device, not a theory, and his even more enigmatic statement that we are the intelligence which controls the phenomena, these only add further layers to the profound enigma that is John Keel and his work. Was he a modern-day prophet, uncovering a terrifying, inconvenient truth about our place in the cosmos? Was he a masterful storyteller, a myth-maker for our anxious, technologically saturated times, weaving a new, dark folklore from the raw material of human experience and unexplained events? Or was he, perhaps, a man who stared so long, so intently, so unflinchingly into the abyss of the unknown, that the abyss, as Nietzsche warned, began to stare back, reflecting not only the strangeness of the phenomenon, but also the contours of his own brilliant, complex, and perhaps sometimes tormented, imagination? Ultimately, John Keel's work serves as a permanent, unsettling question mark, deeply etched into the landscape of the unexplained. He doesn't offer solace, but provocation. He compels us to remain vigilant, to question appearances, to distrust simplistic answers, and to acknowledge the profound, often terrifying mystery that lies just beyond the fragile edges of our everyday perception, just beyond the comfortable firelight of our consensus reality. As you turn off the lights tonight, as you drift into those liminal spaces between waking and dreaming, where the boundaries of the mind become porous and the whispers of the other side grow louder, consider the possibility that the veil is indeed thinner than you think. Consider that the ultra-terrestrials, in whatever guise they choose to adopt, with whatever deceptive narrative they choose to weave, might still be out there or perhaps in here, continuing their ancient, inscrutable Operation Trojan Horse. The game, dear listeners, continues, and we are all, whether we realize it or not, players. As we step back from the crossroads, remember, the veil between the known and unknown is thinner than we think. But the story doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. Because what we explore here is not just about the phenomena, but the journey that we are all on, searching for meaning and our purpose in life, seeking the knowledge and the wisdom to solve the deeper mysteries in our universe and to find and fulfill our destiny. Unexplained sightings, spirits, and science. They are all connected, and they have been interwoven into the grand tapestry of life. So remember, keep pulling at the threads, because this has been the Crossroads of the Veil.